The rain fell in sheets that night, washing the city streets in silver and shadow, drumming on the awnings of storefronts and hissing against the windows of the gilded Finch. Inside, the restaurant glowed with soft golden light, a world apart from the storm outside. The air smelled of butter and seared steak, and every polished glass seemed to reflect 100 points of candlelight. Clara Hayes moved through the narrow aisles with practiced grace, balancing trays, smiling politely, and hiding the profound fatigue in her bones. At 22, her life felt like an endless cycle of work and worry. Between rent, her grandmother's medicine, and the bills that never stopped arriving, she had long ago abandoned the dreams she once carried like fragile treasures. Table 7 was his table. The enigmatic billionaire, Damien Cross, always sat alone in that secluded booth. He never brought friends, entertained colleagues, or spoke more than necessary. His eyes, a piercing gray-blue, carried a weight that unsettled the staff. To Clara, he was both terrifying and oddly predictable. He ordered the same steak, medium rare, accompanied by still water, and when the meal ended, he left a tip that was always exactly $500. It was money Clara relied on, though she never allowed herself to imagine the reasons behind his strange generosity. She accepted it as one of the small certainties in her life, like the steady tick of the restaurant clock. The storm swallowed even the city's usual clamor on Tuesday night. The streets outside were nearly empty, and inside the restaurant, the usual chatter was muted, voices subdued by the weather. Damien sat at his usual place, the light catching in his neatly tailored suit, his presence commanding even in silence. Clara felt the tension in the air as she served him, the kind that hinted at something just beneath the surface, though she could not name what it was. He ate without hurry, his expression unreadable. Clara delivered his plate, refilled his water, and cleared the dishes, all in a rhythm that had become second nature. When he finally stood, drawing his coat across his shoulders with a smooth and deliberate motion, his butler, Arthur Pike, appeared at his side as if summoned by some invisible cue. The two men walked toward the door, the storm waiting to swallow them again. Then, it happened. A small object slipped from Damien's inner coat pocket and fell to the carpet with the faintest sound, so quiet that anyone else could have missed it. Clara's eyes, trained by years of watching every table for details, caught it immediately. She hesitated only a moment before stepping forward. It was a wallet. Dark brown leather is supple with age and clearly expensive. It bore the marks of extended use, softened edges, and a faint crease along one corner. She bent and picked it up, intending to call out, to return it before the door closed behind him. But Damien was already gone, swallowed into the night, the black sedan gliding away with the soundless ease of wealth. For a moment, Clara stood there, the wallet's weight in her hand heavier than she expected. The protocol was clear. She should bring it to Gerald, the manager, and he would lock it in the safe until Mr. Cross returned. That was what a professional would do. That was what the dutiful waitress in her uniform should do. But Clara was not only a waitress tonight. She was a daughter who had grown up with more questions than answers, a girl haunted by the absence of her mother, Isabella, who had vanished 2 decades earlier without a word. Curiosity was dangerous, she knew this. Yet, as she brushed her thumb across the worn leather, a restless energy spread through her, and her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were the trappings of privilege she expected: a sleek black credit card, others lined neatly behind it, a driver's license with Damien's impassive photograph, and a stack of crisp bills. It all spoke of wealth and power, a life untouchable. Then she saw it. A small photograph tucked carefully behind the plastic sleeve, edges faded, colors softened by time. Clara's breath caught, as though the air had been ripped from her lungs. The picture showed a young woman with auburn hair falling in loose waves, laughing into the camera, her green eyes bright and alive. The image was simple, just a picnic blanket spread in a field of wildflowers, but it was seared into Clara's memory because she had stared at its twin nearly every night of her life. The same photograph sat on her bedside table, in a cheap frame that had survived every move and struggle. It was the only image she owned of her mother, Isabella Hayes, the mother who had disappeared when Clara was barely old enough to remember her face. The room around her seemed to fade. The chatter of diners, the clink of silverware, even the low rumble of thunder outside dissolved into silence. All that existed was the photograph and the questions it raised. Why did Damien Cross, the city's most elusive billionaire, carry the image of her mother in his wallet? What connection bound them across time and secrecy? Her knees weakened, forcing her to grip the edge of a nearby table to steady herself. The familiar world of bills, shifts, and weary routine was shattered instantly. In its place was a terrifying possibility that threatened to unravel everything she thought she knew about her life, her family, and herself. In her hand lay proof of a connection that should not exist, undeniable and impossible. And as the storm raged outside, Clara realized that her life had just shifted from the ordinary into the unknown, and there was no way back. Clara barely slept that night. Each time she closed her eyes, the photograph returned to her thoughts. Her mother's laughing face appeared so clearly that it felt like Isabella was alive, just beyond reach, waiting to enter the door. But when the vision faded, the terrifying reality remained. Damien Cross, a man she had never spoken to beyond polite exchanges, carried that same photograph in his wallet. A man who could buy entire city blocks, who commanded loyalty from politicians and silence from newspapers, kept her mother's image tucked where no one was meant to see it. The storm outside had finally broken by dawn, leaving the city damp and shining under a pale gray sky. Clara sat at the small table in her apartment, her grandmother's pills laid out in careful rows, untouched tea cooling by her elbow. She kept turning the wallet in her hands, as if its worn leather might yield secrets if she stared hard enough. She had locked it in the restaurant's safe as protocol demanded, but not before committing every detail to memory. The photograph, the crisp bills, the weight of something personal that had no business in her world. Questions swirled endlessly. Why him? How? Was Damien Cross a forgotten chapter in her mother's past? Or was he why Isabella had vanished? Every story her father told her growing up, every bedtime reassurance that her mother had been too gentle for the world, too restless to stay in one place, they cracked under the pressure of this discovery. Had those stories been lies to shield her from something darker? At the restaurant the following evening, Clara felt the shift in the air as soon as she stepped inside. Gerald, her manager, barked orders with more impatience than usual. The regulars murmured in their booths, but none of it mattered. She moved through the motions of serving drinks and balancing trays as though in a daze, every nerve stretched taut in anticipation. Damien would return. He always did, and with him would come the inevitable moment when he realized what he had lost. Sure enough, the familiar black sedan slid into place outside just after 7. Arthur Pike emerged first, his posture as rigid as iron, scanning the street before holding the door open. Then Damien appeared, composed as ever, though Clara thought she caught the faintest flicker of unease in the set of his jaw. His eyes swept the room as he entered, pausing for only a breath when they landed on her. Then he moved to his booth as though nothing were amiss. Clara's heart hammered as she approached with his order. She carried the tray calmly, but her fingers tightened on the edge until her knuckles whitened. His gaze followed her with quiet intensity, a storm bottled just beneath the surface. He said nothing when she placed the steak before him, nothing when she poured his water, but as she turned to leave, his voice, low and precise, stopped her. "You found something that was not yours to find." Her breath caught. She turned slowly, meeting those storm-gray eyes that seemed to strip her bare. The restaurant buzzed with ordinary life around them, but between the two of them stretched a silence heavy with unspoken truth. She wanted to deny it, to feign ignorance, but her voice betrayed her. "It was her," she whispered, so faintly she wasn't sure he heard. "My mother." "Why?" The mask on his face cracked for a fraction of a second. A flicker of recognition, of old pain, passed through his eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by the granite calm he wore like armor. He cut into his steak with measured precision, his tone dismissive, but the tremor beneath it did not escape her. "Be careful what questions you ask, Miss Hayes." Chapter 12. Some truths do not belong to you. Her pulse quickened. He knew her name. Of course he did. Men like him knew everything. but the weight of it on his tongue made her feel exposed, as though he had been watching her far longer than she realized. The rest of the shift passed in a blur. Damien finished his meal, left his usual tip, and departed with Arthur close behind. But the words lingered, sharper than any blade. Some truths do not belong to you. That night, Clara pulled her father's old chest from the closet, the one she had never brought herself to throw away. She sifted through his tools, manuals, and worn coveralls until she found the hidden compartment she had never noticed before. Her hands shook as she pried it open. Inside lay a bundle of letters tied with ribbon, a brass key shaped like a feather, and a note written in her mother's elegant script. Do not trust them. Do not believe their promises. His pride is his weakness. Take our little starling and fly. Her breath caught again at the words. Starling, her father's name for her. The note was a warning, not just to him, but to her, echoing across 2 decades. The feather key gleamed faintly in the lamplight, its edges worn smooth by time. And suddenly, the photograph was not the only mystery. There was far more that her family had hidden, waiting for her to uncover. The questions that had haunted her since childhood were no longer whispers. They were a demand, a storm rising inside her. And Clara knew with bone-deep certainty that she could not turn away now. Whatever Damien Cross knew, whatever secrets her mother had carried, they were bound to her life like an inheritance of shadows. As the city outside sank into restless sleep, Clara sat awake, the letters and key spread before her, the photograph etched in her mind. The path ahead terrified her, but she felt the shape of something greater forming, a story larger than herself. She was not running from the past. For the first time in her life, she was walking straight into it. The morning air was sharp with the chill of early autumn, the kind that made Clara's lungs ache with every breath. She stood at Cross Tower's base, a monolithic black glass spire that rose like a dagger into the Boston skyline. It wasn't just a building, it was a fortress, a declaration of power, and she felt every inch the intruder. Men and women in tailored suits streamed through the revolving doors, their heels and polished shoes clicking across the marble with purpose. In her simple sweater and dark jeans, Clara clutched the wallet against her chest as if it were a shield. She had rehearsed her words on the subway ride, mouthing them silently to her reflection in the smeared window. I need to see Damien Cross. I have something of his. It sounded steady in her mind, resolute even, but as she stepped through the gleaming glass doors, her heart raced so hard it seemed to echo in her ears. The lobby was cavernous, filled with cool white marble and steel, its silence broken only by the muted footsteps of those who belonged. At the center stood a reception desk as imposing as the rest of the building. Behind it sat a woman with immaculate hair and a smile that was as polished and cold as the marble. She looked up as Clara approached, her eyes sliding over her plain clothes, her presence with barely concealed disdain. I need to see Mr. Cross, Clara said, forcing her voice not to tremble. Do you have an appointment? The receptionist asked, her tone more statement than question. No, Clara admitted. She drew in a sharp breath and held up the wallet. But it's personal. I have something of his. The receptionist's gaze didn't shift. Her smile thinned, professional and dismissive. You can leave it with me. I'll ensure Mr. Cross's assistant receives it. Clara's grip on the wallet tightened until her knuckles turned white. No, she said, her voice breaking but firm. I need to give it to him myself. It's important. The receptionist's perfectly arched brows rose. Security will... Before she could finish, a voice cut through the air, low and commanding. What seems to be the problem here? Arthur Pike, Damien's ever-present shadow, stepped forward. His gray eyes scanned the scene, calculating, sharp. Clara's stomach knotted as his gaze landed on her. He recognized her instantly, the waitress who had served Damien countless meals, the one who now stood clutching his employer's wallet like contraband. This young woman insists on seeing Mr. Cross personally, the receptionist said, her words dripping with irritation. Arthur studied Clara for a long, suffocating moment. His eyes lingered on her desperation, the tremor in her hands, and the fierce determination blazing beneath her fear. At last he gave a curt nod. Wait here, he ordered, before turning on his heel and disappearing into a private elevator. Minutes dragged like hours. Clara stood rooted to the marble floor, her body buzzing nervously. She felt the stares of passing executives prick her skin, their eyes marking her as an anomaly, an intruder. She clutched the wallet tighter. For the first time since she found the photograph, doubt flooded her chest. What if she was making a mistake? What if Damien had no answers to give, or worse, what if the answers destroyed her? The elevator doors slid open again. Arthur reappeared, his face unreadable. "Mr. Cross will see you," he said. The ride was silent, the kind of silence pressed heavy against the skin. Clara stared at her reflection in the mirrored walls, her own wide eyes staring back, pale and haunted. When the elevator chimed, her knees nearly buckled. The doors opened directly into an office larger than her entire apartment. One wall was a sheer expanse of glass, the city sprawling beneath it like a conquered kingdom. The furniture was sleek, modern, and arranged with the precision of a chessboard. The air smelled faintly of leather and old books. Damien Cross stood at the window, his hands clasped behind his back, his profile outlined against the skyline. He didn't turn as she entered. His voice, low and rumbling, carried across the vast room. "Arthur tells me you found my wallet. I appreciate your honesty. Leave it on the desk. You may tell my assistant your name and address. A reward will be sent." His dismissal was so casual it cut like a blade. Clara's fear burned away, replaced by anger. She took a step forward, her voice trembling but clear. "I don't want a reward." That made him turn. His storm-gray eyes locked onto hers, and she forgot to breathe for a moment. The intensity of his gaze was staggering, like staring into a storm. "Then what do you want?" he asked, his impatience threaded with something sharper, more dangerous. Clara's hands fumbled as she opened the wallet, pulling out the photograph. She held it up, her voice cracking but resolute. "I want to know why you have a picture of my mother." The air in the room shifted, thickening with tension. The mask of indifference slipped from Damien's face, replaced by something glacial and furious. His jaw clenched, a muscle feathering at the corner of his mouth. In 2 long strides he closed the distance, snatching the photo from her trembling fingers. "You have no idea what you're meddling in," he hissed, his voice like a whip. His presence was overwhelming, suffocating in the enclosed space. "You think this is some forgotten love story? Some scandal to feed your curiosity? You know nothing." Clara's knees shook, but she stood her ground. "Then tell me, I've lived my whole life in the dark. I deserve the truth." For the first time, the impenetrable Titan looked human. He stared at her with eyes that held not just fury, but something more profound, pain, regret, and the shadow of a past that refused to die. He turned back to the window, his voice low and heavy. "The truth," Damien said, "is not what you think. And it will destroy you." The silence in the office was unbearable, a heavy, suffocating weight that pressed against Clara's chest. Damien Cross stood with his back to her, framed against the sprawling view of the city, his reflection a shadow in the glass. When it finally came, his voice was low, tired, stripped of the commanding authority she had always known him to possess. "Your father," he began, "was Frank Monroe, a mechanic, a simple man in a small town called Northwood." Clara's breath caught. The name was a knife to her heart. Hearing it from Damien's lips felt invasive, almost cruel. "How do you know that?" she demanded, trembling with fear and fury. Damien turned at last, his storm-gray eyes meeting hers with an intensity that rooted her to the spot. "Because your mother told me," he said, each word deliberate, "and because she was not who you think she was." Clara's heart hammered. "She was Liliana Monroe," she said defiantly. "A woman who loved painting, who loved my father, who left because she couldn't handle the life they had." The words tasted bitter even as she spoke them, because she had always doubted them deep down. Damien shook his head, his expression grave. That was an alias, a mask she wore to escape the world she was born into. Your mother was not Liliana Monroe, she was Liliana Davenport. The name fell like a thunderclap in the quiet room. Clara's lips parted, her mind racing. The name meant nothing to her, yet everything in Damien's tone told her it should. He oversaw her, gauging her confusion, her disbelief. "The Davenports," he continued, his voice carrying the weight of a history long buried, "are among the most powerful families on the East Coast. Old money. Generational wealth. Their influence is woven into the fabric of this country's institutions, courts, politics, corporations. They do not tolerate disobedience. They do not forgive betrayal. And your mother? Your mother defied them all." Clara staggered back, her hand gripping the edge of a leather chair as if the room was tilting. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "That can't be true. My mother she was ordinary." "She wanted to be," Damien said, his voice softening with a flicker of something almost tender. "That was the life she craved, a quiet home, a husband she loved, a child she cherished. But it was never hers to have. She was born into a cage of gold, with her future arranged before she could walk. She was promised, Clara, promised to me." The words hit like a physical blow. Clara stared at him, her pulse pounding in her ears. "Promised to you?" Damien's jaw tightened. His gaze flickered with old pain. "It was an arrangement between families, a merger of power and legacy. I knew her my whole life. She was brilliant, passionate, but suffocated. When she met your father, she chose love over destiny. She ran. She erased her name and her past and became Liliana Monroe. For a time, she was free." Clara's legs nearly gave way beneath her. She sank into the chair, her breath coming in ragged bursts. The image of her mother laughing on a picnic blanket twisted violently in her mind, colliding with this new truth. Her mother hadn't simply disappeared because of weakness or selfishness. She had been hiding. She had been hunted. Damien's eyes darkened as he paced the room, his voice dropping lower. Her father, Jedediah Davenport, did not see her love as rebellion. He saw it as betrayal. It was the ultimate insult to him. A daughter spurning the family legacy for a mechanic. He vowed to punish her. And he had the power to do it. Judges, senators, bankers, all bought and paid for. He unleashed a quiet war to track her down. Clara's stomach twisted. The floor seemed to fall away beneath her. "You knew," she whispered. "You knew she ran. You knew what would happen." "I tried to stop it," Damien said, and for a fleeting moment, his mask of stone cracked, revealing raw regret beneath. "I tried to warn her. I tried to find her first. For years, she sent me letters through an intermediary, small updates, fragments of a life she wanted me to know she had. This photograph," he lifted it between two fingers, his thumb brushing the faded edges, "came with the last letter she ever sent. She wrote of her joy, of you, of being a mother, and then the letters stopped." The memory carved deep lines into his face. He looked older, wearier than Clara had ever seen. "When I finally tracked her to Northwood, the house was abandoned. The neighbors said your father died in an accident in his workshop. They said your mother packed up her car and left with you in the dead of night. That's the story the world knows. But it is not the truth." Clara's throat burned. "She didn't take me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "She left me with my aunt. She never came back." Damien's expression hardened. "Because she didn't leave by choice. Because she was taken. Your mother did not abandon you, Clara. She was stolen from you." The words cut through her like glass, sharp and final. Tears blurred her vision, but behind them burned a growing fire. Her life had been a lie crafted to protect her from a truth darker than anything she had imagined. The mother she thought had walked away hadn't abandoned her at all. She had been forced, ripped away by the same family whose blood now ran in Clara's veins. Damien's gaze locked onto hers, unyielding. "The truth is a burden and will destroy you if you let it. But you wanted answers, Clara. Now you have them. Your mother's bloodline is not one of love and freedom. It is of chains and power. And whether you want it or not, that legacy is yours." The room fell silent again, but this time it was charged with something volatile, like a storm gathering in the distance. Clara sat frozen, the photograph clutched in her trembling hands, her world shattered and remade in a single revelation. The night after her confrontation with Damien Cross was a blur for Clara. She stumbled back to her apartment like a sleepwalker, her thoughts colliding in violent fragments. Her mother was Liliana Davenport. Her father had not died by misfortune, but perhaps by murder. And Damien, the untouchable billionaire who loomed like a storm over the city, was bound to her family by chains of blood and betrayal. Sleep was impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the photograph of her mother, glowing like a beacon of joy, only for it to dissolve into the cold fury in Damien's eyes. By dawn, Clara was a woman possessed. She could no longer cling to fragments of second-hand stories. She needed the truth carved in her mother's own hand. Something inside her screamed that the answers still existed, hidden away from the world. And so she turned to the only relic of her father she still had, a heavy wooden chest he had left behind before his so-called accident. She dragged the chest from the back of her closet, the scrape of wood on the floor loud in the morning silence. The smell of oil and dust rose like a ghost when she opened it. She had gone through it countless times before as a grieving child, searching for scraps of him, for the scent of his shirt, the feel of his tools. But now her eyes were sharp, hungry, searching for secrets. She emptied the chest, spreading the contents across the floor. Old tools, coveralls, dog-eared manuals, all ordinary, all heartbreakingly familiar. Then her fingers brushed against a panel at the bottom. Something about it felt different, too smooth, too deliberate. Heart pounding, she pried at the corner until it gave way, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside lay a small flat metal box, its surface cold and unyielding, locked tight with a simple latch. Her hands shook as she grabbed a screwdriver from the pile of tools and forced it open. Nestled inside, wrapped in yellowed cotton, were objects that did not belong to an ordinary mechanic's life. A bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon, a minor, ornate key shaped like a peacock's feather, its edges worn by time, and a folded piece of paper whose creases were as fragile as bone. Clara unfolded it carefully, her breath catching when she saw the handwriting. Elegant, flowing, undeniably her mother's. My dearest Frank, they have found us if you are reading this. Do not trust them. Do not believe their promises. Jedediah's reach is long. Remember my stories of the aviary. The peacock sees all. His pride is his weakness. Take our little starling and fly. The key is for the city nest. Everything you need is there. I love you more than all the stars. Yours forever, Lily. Clara pressed the paper to her chest, tears falling silently onto the ink. The words were a dagger and a lifeline at once. Her mother hadn't abandoned them. She had fought to protect them. She had left a trail, and Clara was no longer just a daughter starved for answers. She was the starling her mother had begged to save. The key gleamed in the dim light, its feather shape shimmering with strange promise. The city nest. It had to mean a place in Boston. Her mind raced through every possible connection until she remembered her mother's letter about dreaming of a studio, a sanctuary filled with canvases and light. A nest. Her hands shook as she untied the ribbon on the bundle of letters. They were love letters, fragile with age, written before Clara was born. In them, her mother spoke of her longing for a life beyond the Davenport name, of her joy at finding Frank, and, always, of the fear that the eyes of the peacock were still watching. One letter mentioned Winslow Place, a quiet street with old brick buildings. A studio she admired stood there, where she longed to make her own. Clara clutched the letters, the key, and the note, her heart thundering with the weight of revelation. She knew where she had to go. That afternoon, she stood before the discreet sign of Winslow Place Storage, her stomach twisting with dread and hope. The clerk behind the desk barely looked up when she asked about a unit under the names Monroe or Davenport. Nothing, he said, his voice flat. Defeat clawed at her chest until her mother's words echoed in her mind. His pride is his weakness. Jedediah Davenport. The name itself was a weapon. She asked him to check, and the clerk's eyebrows rose. Unit 312, rented 22 years ago, was paid in full for 50 years. She nearly collapsed under its weight. Her mother had hidden her sanctuary right under her father's nose. The corridor was cold and dim, every step echoing like a heartbeat. Clara slid the ornate key into the lock. It turned with a satisfying click, and the door swung open. She braced herself for dust and cobwebs, but found a world frozen in time. Canvases leaned against the walls, filled with wild fields and golden skies. An unfinished painting sat on an easel, vibrant strokes arrested mid-bloom. And on a desk in the corner lay a leather-bound journal. Clara's trembling fingers opened it, and her mother's voice poured out in ink. Every page was a lifeline, recounting her escape, love for Frank, joy at carrying Clara, and constant fear of being hunted. She read until her eyes blurred, devouring each word, and reached the final entries, where the handwriting trembled. Liliana wrote of a man in town, a lapel pin with a peacock glinting in the sun, and her growing terror. Then came the name that froze Clara's blood, Peterson. Her mother wrote that Peterson claimed to come on behalf of Damien, promising safety. But she did not believe him. She wrote of Frank's sudden death, an accident that was no accident, of her capture, of a choice she never had, and at the bottom of the page was a witness signature. A Peterson. The journal slipped from Clara's hands, landing softly on the studio floor. The world around her spun. Damien had not been her mother's protector. He had been her betrayer. The man she thought had carried her mother's photograph out of love had destroyed her family instead. Rage ignited in her veins. She gathered the diary and letters, her hands trembling, but her eyes burning with resolve. The truth was not enough anymore. There had to be justice. And Peterson, the silent shadow who had stood at Damien's side, was the key to unraveling it all. The city streets glistened under the rain, neon reflections streaking across the asphalt as Clara approached the one man who held the answers she needed. Peterson, for years he had been nothing more than a shadow at Damien Cross's side, a silent sentinel who seemed immune to the gossip and speculation surrounding his employer. But now, after discovering her mother's diary and seeing his signature at the bottom of her final plea, he was no longer a mystery figure. He was a participant, a witness to her family's destruction, and Clara would not rest until she confronted him. She knew his routine. Every evening, at precisely 7 o'clock, while Damien dined alone at his reserved table inside the Gilded Sparrow, Peterson waited in the black sedan, tucked into the alley behind the restaurant, a creature of habit, immovable as stone. Tonight, Clara did not step into her waitress uniform. Instead, she wrapped herself in a dark coat, the diary heavy in her bag, its weight like a weapon against her ribs. She arrived early, the drizzle clinging to her hair, and pressed herself into the alley's shadows. Her heart thumped like a drum, each beat timed with the ticking of her wristwatch. Then, right on schedule, the sleek black car slid into the alley with a whisper. The engine stilled, and Peterson emerged, tall and rigid, his face unreadable as always. He adjusted the cuffs of his gloves and settled into his usual stance beside the car, eyes fixed on the restaurant's back door. Clara stepped forward. The sound of her boots on the wet pavement drew his attention. His head turned slowly, and she saw a flicker of surprise cross his granite features for the first time. "Mr. Peterson," she said, her voice sharper than she expected. He didn't flinch, didn't even raise an eyebrow. Instead, he inclined his head slightly, acknowledging an inevitability he had long anticipated. "Miss Monroe," he replied, his voice deep and gravelly. "You should not be here." "I should," Clara said, taking another step closer. Her hands tightened around the strap of her bag. "I found my mother's studio. I saw her diary." Something flickered in his eyes for a fraction of a second, an almost imperceptible tightening, a shadow of guilt. Clara pressed on, her voice rising. "I read her words. She wrote about you. She said you came claiming Damien sent you to make a deal. She said you were there when my father died. She told you that she watched as they took her away." Peterson's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Clara pulled the diary from her bag and held it like a holy relic. "Your name is right here," she said, her voice trembling with fury. "Signed by you, a Peterson. Was it Anthony? Arthur? Does it matter? You stood there and watched as they destroyed her. The rain dripped steadily around them, the silence between words heavy and suffocating. At last, Peterson's eyes lifted to meet hers. They were tired eyes, worn by decades of silence and service. His voice cracked when he spoke. "Anthony. My name is Anthony." The simple confession nearly robbed Clara of breath. She had expected denial, threats, perhaps even cold indifference. Not this. "I was there," he continued, his voice low, rasping with the weight of memory. "But what your mother believed, what she wrote, it was not the whole truth." Clara's fury flared. Not the whole truth? She wrote it with her own hand. She believed Damien betrayed her. And you, her words faltered, she thought you were his tool. Anthony's gaze dropped to the slick cobblestones. "They intercepted me," he said, his voice breaking. "Jedediah's men. I was carrying money, new identities, a way out for all of you. Damien had sent me to get you free before the Davenport hounds closed in. But I never made it to your door. They stopped me. They stripped me of everything I carried. Then they used my presence to poison her hope. They told her Damien had given up, that I was there to drag her back. They forced me to stand there as they fed her the lie." The words sliced into Clara, her rage colliding with disbelief. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "That's impossible." Anthony's voice grew heavy with shame. "They murdered your father and made it look like an accident. Then they walked me into that house like Judas, forcing me to witness her surrender. They made me sign my name so Damien would know his most trusted man had been broken. It was Jedediah's message, a triumph over both her and him." Clara staggered back a step, her breath ragged. The rain blurred her vision, mixing with tears she didn't want to shed. She wanted to hate him, to scream and claw at the man who had been the specter of her nightmares. But in his voice, in his broken confession, she heard something else. Regret. Atonement. "Why?" she whispered, her voice raw. "Why stay by his side after all this? Why live in his shadow when you were part of the lie?" Anthony raised his eyes, and Clara saw not the impenetrable butler for the first time, but a man hollowed by guilt. "Loyalty," he said, "and atonement. When I told Damien what had happened, I watched him break. I have only seen him break once. He swore that night he would become stronger than Jedediah and build an empire not for power's sake, but as a weapon. Every deal he's made, every empire he's built, has been for this war, for you, for her legacy." The diary trembled in Clara's hands. Her anger tangled with sorrow, her certainty unraveling in the face of Anthony's confession. Could Damien have carried her photograph not as a trophy of guilt, but as penance? Could his ruthless rise have been fueled by more than greed? Anthony's voice dropped to a whisper. He lives with the knowledge that she believed he betrayed her. That photograph in his wallet is his punishment, a daily reminder of the promise he failed to keep. Clara felt her chest tighten, her tears falling freely now. She had come here thirsting for vengeance, to unmask a monster. Instead, she found two men haunted by ghosts, waging a war she had never known existed. "Is she alive?" Clara asked, her voice breaking with desperate hope. Anthony's expression hardened, but his tone was grave. "We believe so, at the Davenport estate. A ghost in a gilded prison." The alley fell silent except for the rain. Clara's fury had become sharper, more complex and more dangerous. Purpose. She looked past Anthony toward the glow of the Gilded Sparrow's back door, where Damien Cross dined in solitude, a king with a kingdom built on guilt. The truth was clear now, and with it came a vow. Her mother had told her to live, but Clara understood now that living was not enough. She would fight. She would take back what had been stolen, and neither Damien Cross nor Jedediah Davenport would stand in her way. Clara returned to her apartment, with the diary still clutched tightly against her chest, her mind a whirlwind of revelations and contradictions. Anthony's confession had opened a door she had not known existed, but stepping through it meant leaving behind everything familiar, her life as a waitress, her quiet grief, even the fragile illusion of safety, All of it was gone. Now there was only the truth, jagged and demanding. The apartment felt different when she entered. The peeling wallpaper, the sagging couch, the little kitchen with its single buzzing light bulb seemed smaller, almost staged, as though she had outgrown it in a single night. She set the diary down on the table, and her eyes fell on the wooden chest in the corner, the one her aunt had given her after her father's death. She had sifted through it before, looking for traces of the man who had raised her, but now, with the veil ripped away, she understood it might hold something more. Clara dragged the heavy chest into the center of the room and knelt before it. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the lid. The familiar smell of oil and dust rushed out. Inside were his coveralls, faded manuals, a collection of old tools, and the faint scent of gasoline that clung to them all. She spread everything onto the floor. For a moment, disappointment threatened to overwhelm her. It was all the same as before, ordinary relics of a mechanic's life. But then she noticed something she had missed years ago. A seam in the bottom panel of the chest, barely perceptible. Her heart began to race. Using one of her father's screwdrivers, she pried at the edge until the false bottom lifted with a creak. Beneath it was a small metal box, flat and tarnished with age. Her hands shook as she lifted it out and set it on the floor. The lock gave way with a quick twist of the screwdriver. Inside lay a bundle of letters tied with a ribbon that had long since faded, a gold-colored key shaped like a feather, and a folded note. Clara unfolded the note carefully. The handwriting was her mother's, elegant, looping, but hurried. "My dearest Frank, they have found us if you are reading this. Do not trust them, do not believe their promises. Jedediah's reach is long. Remember my stories of the aviary, the peacock sees all. His pride is his weakness. Take our little starling and fly. The key is for the city nest. Everything you need is there. I love you more than all the stars. Yours forever, Lily." Clara pressed the paper to her lips, her throat tightening. Little starling. Her father had always called her that, a pet name she had never truly understood. Now it felt like a thread connecting her to the mother she barely remembered. The key glinted under the light, intricate and heavy, its feather design unmistakable. She turned to the letters next. Untying the ribbon, she found page after page written in her mother's hand, words filled with hope and longing. Love letters were exchanged with her father before she was born, and there were dreams of escape and promises of a future free from the iron grip of the Davenport family. But beneath the romance ran a steady current of fear. Again and again, her mother mentioned the peacock, the family symbol, a reminder of their vigilance. The peacock's eyes are everywhere, and one letter is read. Pride is his blind spot. Use it against him. The words weren't just love notes. They were warnings, carefully threaded into the fabric of her affection. Clara felt the weight of their dual purpose. A shield of love and a code of survival. But what was the city nest? She scanned the letters again, searching for any mention. One letter spoke of a dream her mother had cherished. An art studio in Boston, a sanctuary where she could paint without fear of being watched. She had even mentioned a street, Winslow Place. Clara's pulse quickened. Could this be the clue? She rose, clutching the key and the letters. The storm outside had quieted, leaving the city draped in a damp hush. She barely slept that night, her mind racing with possibilities. By morning, resolve had hardened inside her like steel. She had followed the thread this far, she would not stop now. Winslow Place was a quiet street tucked away in a historic city quarter. The cobblestones gleamed under the morning sun, and the buildings stood dignified with their old brick facades. A discreet sign at the end of the street, Winslow Place Storage, private units for long-term use. Inside, a clerk sat behind a desk, yawning as he typed lazily at his computer. Clara approached, clutching the feather key in her pocket. "I'm looking for a storage unit," she said, trying to steady her voice. "It might have been rented 20 years ago under Monroe or Davenport." The clerk tapped without enthusiasm and shook his head. Nothing under those names. Clara's heart sank, but then she remembered her mother's note. His pride is his weakness. Perhaps her mother had turned Jedediah's arrogance against him. "Could you check under Jedediah Davenport?" she asked. The clerk's brows shot up. "Well, that's unusual. Unit 312. Rented 22 years ago. Paid in full for 50 years. No one's touched it since." Her pulse hammered as she held up the ornate key. "I have what I need." The clerk waved her down a long, dim corridor. Clara climbed the stairs to the third floor, her footsteps echoing. The door to Unit 312 waited, silent and imposing. She slid the feather-shaped key into the lock. It turned with a soft click. When she pushed open the door, the air was cool and still. The room beyond was not a storage unit filled with boxes, but an artist's studio frozen in time. Canvases leaned against the walls, vibrant with colors that defied the darkness of their creator's fate. In the center stood an easel holding an unfinished painting of wildflowers, as if her mother had just stepped away. On a small desk rested a leather-bound journal. Clara approached slowly, her breath caught in her throat. She opened the journal and found page after page of her mother's handwriting, her fears, joys, and terror as the Davenports closed in. Each entry pulled her deeper into the hidden legacy her parents had left behind. And with every word, Clara understood one thing: her mother had not abandoned her. She had fought to protect her, even as the world closed in. The studio was a message across decades, bridging past and present. And Clara knew, as she stood among her mother's colors and confessions, that this was only the beginning. The legacy was hers now, and it demanded she finish what had been started. Clara sat at the small desk in the hidden studio, her trembling fingers turning the pages of the leather-bound journal. The entries began with joy, her mother's voice full of wonder at her new life with Frank, filled with love, hope, and the thrill of freedom. But as the pages progressed, the tone shifted into dread. The words darkened, the sentences grew shorter, sharper, as though fear had seeped into the ink. October 12th. A man was in town today. He wore a suit that was more expensive than our house. He asked questions about me. I saw the pin on his lapel, a peacock. Jedediah has found us. Clara's throat tightened as she whispered the words aloud. The following entry came 2 days later, frantic scrawls across the page. Frank is scared. He wants us to run again, to take Eliza north to Canada. We are packing tonight. Her eyes blurred with tears as she turned the page. October 15th. Too late. He sent someone. Not Jedediah himself, but Peterson. He said Corbin sent him, but I do not believe it. Corbin would have come himself. Clara's hands froze. Peterson. The same Peterson had stood silently at Corbin's side in the tower and at the restaurant. The man who had led her into Corbin's office with a calm expression. According to her mother's diary, he had been there the night everything collapsed. She flipped to the final entry and her stomach twisted. October 16th. Frank is dead. They said it was an accident in his shop, a faulty lift. I know it was no accident. Jedediah's men are here. They tell me that if I come quietly, they will let my little starling live. They say Frank's sister can raise her. They are letting me write this last page. My name is Liliana Davenport. My father has murdered my husband and stolen my life. Please do not search for me. Live, my sweet Clara, live. At the bottom, beneath the shaky signature of her mother, was another name. Witnessed by A. Peterson. The journal slipped from Clara's hands and landed on the floor with a heavy thud. The sound echoed through the silent studio. She pressed her palms to her temples, her breath shallow, her heart pounding. The narrative she had clung to, the image of Corbin as a protector, a silent guardian, crumbled under the weight of her mother's words. If the diary was true, Corbin had not saved her mother. He had betrayed her. For long minutes, she sat frozen, her mind a battlefield of rage and grief. The photograph in his wallet, the tips, the careful watch over her life, it all seemed to shift, no longer acts of protection but of guilt. A penance for a sin so profound it could never be forgiven. But beneath the storm of her thoughts, another current tugged at her. Doubt. Her mother had written the entry under duress, surrounded by her captors. Could the words have been twisted, forced, or poisoned by Jedediah's manipulations? Clara's jaw clenched. Whether betrayal or guilt, Peterson was the common thread. He had been there. His signature lay on the final page of her mother's freedom. If anyone could give her the truth, it was him. She gathered the journal, tucked it into her bag, and left the studio. The city outside seemed sharper now, the colors too bright, the sounds too loud. Her path was clear. She would not confront Corbin directly. He would deny, deflect, bury her under the weight of his power. But Peterson, the silent shadow, might break. That evening, she did not take her shift at the Gilded Sparrow. Instead, she positioned herself in the alley where she had often seen the sleek black sedan wait during Corbin's dinners. The cobblestones were damp from an earlier rain, and the shadows clung like heavy curtains. At precisely 7, the car rolled into place. Peterson stepped out, rigid as ever, his eyes scanning the alley before fixing on the restaurant's back entrance. Clara's pulse thundered. She stepped forward, clutching the diary like a weapon. She called Mr. Peterson, her voice ringing sharper than she intended. His head turned slowly. His expression betrayed nothing, but there was a flicker in his eyes, a shadow of recognition. "Miss Monroe," he said evenly, as if he had been waiting for this moment. "You should not be here." "I should," Clara answered, forcing strength into her voice. She pulled the diary from her bag and held it high. "I found my mother's words, her last entries, and your name at the bottom. Witnessed by A. Peterson." For the first time, his composure cracked. A tightening around his mouth, a flicker of guilt in his eyes. Clara pressed forward. "She said you came to her, claiming Corbin sent you. That you watched as Jedediah's men destroyed my family. You were his tool." The silence stretched. The only sound was the faint hum of the city, the muted clatter from the restaurant beyond the alley. Then Peterson lowered his gaze to the cobblestones, his shoulders sagging as though under a weight he had carried for decades. "My name is Anthony," he said, his voice rough with something dangerously close to regret. "And you are right. I was there." Clara's breath caught. She had expected denials, threats, even silence, but not this. Anthony lifted his gaze again, and she saw a crack in the stone facade for the first time. It seemed to hollow him out, not just guilt, but deep sorrow. His words would either shatter her little faith in Corbin Shaw or reignite the faintest spark of hope. And Clara braced herself, knowing the diary had not ended the story. It had only begun the reckoning. Anthony Peterson stood in the narrow alley, the rain-slick cobblestones glinting beneath the dim streetlights, his posture no longer that of an impenetrable sentinel, but of a man burdened by decades of secrets. Clara held the diary tightly against her chest, her eyes burning with rage and desperation. She had expected him to lie, dismiss her, and act as Corbin Shaw's loyal guard dog. Instead, his simple confession had cracked open something far more complex. "I was there," he repeated, his voice low, gravelly, as if admitting the truth took fragments from his soul. "But you must understand that what your mother believed in her final words was untrue. It was the weapon your grandfather wielded to break her spirit." Clara's grip tightened on the journal. She read those words, she whispered, her voice trembling but sharp. "She believed Corbin betrayed her. She signed your name. She died with that belief." Anthony's face twisted with sorrow. "Not died," he corrected softly. "Taken. Your mother was taken. And yes, she believed Corbin had turned against her, because that was precisely what Jedediah wanted her to believe." Clara stepped closer, fury blazing in her chest. "And you let him do it. You stood there, you watched, you signed." He flinched as if struck. "I signed because they forced me to. Because Jedediah wanted Corbin to know that his most trusted man had been made a witness to his failure. That his reach, his power, was nothing compared to Davenport blood. Have I slept a whole night since then? Do you think I don't see your mother's face when I close my eyes?" Clara's chest heaved. The shadows seemed to pulse around them, the city beyond fading into insignificance. She wanted to scream, to strike him, to tear the truth from his throat. Instead, she forced herself to listen. "Tell me everything," she demanded. "No more half-truths, no more shadows." Anthony nodded slowly, his shoulders sagging. "When your mother ran, Corbin gave me money, new identities, and safe passage out of the country for all three of you. He knew Jedediah was closing in. I was supposed to get to your house before they did, but Jedediah's men intercepted me. They took the resources Corbin had given me, twisted them, and used my presence to convince Liliana she had been betrayed. They walked me into that house like a pawn, and they forced me to stand there while they destroyed everything she loved. Clara's throat tightened. They killed my father, she said, her voice breaking. Anthony's eyes fell to the ground. Yes, they staged it as an accident, but it was no accident. Frank was a good man. They wanted to erase him, to break her completely. And they succeeded. The alley was silent, save for Clara's ragged breaths. A storm churned inside her, grief, anger, and a hollow, gnawing doubt. If what Peterson said was true, Corbin had not betrayed her mother. He had tried to save her, failed, but tried. The photograph in his wallet, the hidden acts of protection, were not guilt alone but devotion, a vow unbroken for 20 years. Yet the wound of betrayal lingered. She remembered her mother's words, inked with terror. Do not trust them. Do not believe their promises. And beneath them, Peterson's name. Why should I believe you now? Clara asked, her voice cold. You have lived as his shadow, serving him while my mother rotted in the Davenport cage. Why should I trust a single word from your mouth? Anthony's gaze lifted, and, for the first time, she saw his eyes unguarded, stripped of duty. Because I have nothing left to lose, he said. My loyalty to Mr. Shaw is not born of blindness, but atonement. I saw him break the night I returned with the truth. He swore then that he would become more potent than Jedediah, powerful enough to one day undo the chains that bound your mother. Everything he has done, every empire he has built, was for that vow. Clara staggered back, her mind spinning. For 20 years? For me? For you, Anthony confirmed. For the daughter of the woman he loved and lost. The $500 tips, the job at the Sparrow, and the unseen shield around your life were his ways of keeping his promise to Liliana. And I stayed at his side because I could not undo what I had witnessed, but I could help build the weapon he needed. Clara pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Her mother's diary told one story, and Anthony's confession was another. Both reeked of tragedy, both dripping with manipulation and betrayal. The truth lay somewhere between, buried in blood and secrets. Is she alive? Clara whispered, the question tearing from her as though it had lived in her throat forever. Anthony's expression was grim. We believe so. Word travels, even in silence. Jedediah keeps her at the estate, a ghost in a house of sorrows, never seen, never heard, but alive. The hope hit her like a sharp, painful, and intoxicating blade. Alive. Her mother, after all these years. Clara stepped back into the shadows, her body trembling with a new resolve. The diary had shattered her. Anthony's confession had reshaped her, and together they left her standing at the edge of something vast and terrible. She could no longer be the grieving girl haunted by absence. She was the daughter of Liliana and Frank, heir to their defiance. Peterson studied her carefully, then spoke with quiet weight. You are not safe anymore. When Jedediah senses the truth has reached you, he will hunt you as he hunted her. Clara's lips parted, her voice steady despite the fire in her chest. Then let him hunt. I am done hiding. Anthony bowed slightly, acknowledging a queen he had long been waiting for. Then you must be ready, he said, because the war your mother tried to escape is about to become yours. The words lingered between them, heavier than the night itself, as Clara walked away from the alley, knowing she could never return to the life she had lived before. The truth had set her on a path that could not be undone, a path toward vengeance, revelation, and the chance to free the mother who still lived in chains. The jet sliced through the night sky, its engines humming like a caged beast held just below a roar. Clara sat by the window, staring at the shrinking lights of Boston until they became nothing more than faint glimmers swallowed by darkness. She pressed her hand against the glass, not for comfort, but to steady herself. For the first time, the weight of what she was stepping into was undeniable. This was no longer a fleeting mystery, nor a daughter's search for closure. It was a war. Across from her, Corbin sat in silence, his posture unyielding, yet visibly worn by the decades of carrying secrets too heavy for one man. His dark sweater softened him from the Titan she had first seen at the Gilded Finch, but the stormy intensity in his eyes remained. Peterson worked at a console near the rear of the cabin, the glow of screens illuminating his weathered features, his fingers moving with practiced precision as he calibrated secure channels and checked in with shadowy contacts scattered across the globe. For long minutes, the cabin was heavy with silence, broken only by the rhythmic thrum of engines. Clara's mind swirled with images, her mother's radiant smile captured in a photograph, her father's quiet sadness, the words inked in the diary that had shattered the foundation of her life. She forced herself to meet Corbin's gaze. "Tell me the truth," she demanded, "all of it. No omissions this time." Corbin leaned forward, his hands clasped together, the faint tremor in his fingers betraying the intensity of his restraint. "The truth is never one piece, Clara," he said slowly. "It is a mosaic, shards of light and shadow. What you read in your mother's journal was true to her perception. What Peterson confessed is true to what he lived. And my truth lies somewhere between." Clara's jaw tightened. That's not enough. His eyes flickered with pain, then resolve. "When your mother disappeared, I was not just broken, I was defeated. My entire life until that point had been lived in the shadow of the Davenport legacy, bound to their power through promises and blood. When she chose love over duty, it wasn't just rebellion, an escape I envied but could not follow. I tried to protect her, I failed, and in that failure, Jedediah made sure she believed the one person she could have trusted had betrayed her. That has been my prison ever since." Clara's voice cut through the cabin. "And now? What do you call this? Flying worldwide to dig up financial skeletons, to unravel an empire with data instead of guns. Is this redemption or vengeance?" For the first time, a ghost of a smile curved his lips. "Both. Redemption for my vow to her and vengeance for Jedediah's blood spilled." Peterson cleared his throat, his voice steady. "Sir, the Zurich contact confirms readiness. The window will be brief, 60 seconds. Clara, if you're involved in this, you need to understand. One misstep, one hesitation, and this all collapses." Clara stood, her legs unsteady at first, but a resolve burning stronger than her trembling limbs. "I've lived my whole life in hesitation, waiting, and silence. I won't falter now." The words hung in the air, electric, transforming her from the girl who served meals in anonymity to a force standing equal with the two men who had carried her family's tragedy for decades. Corbin nodded, his eyes shining with something between pride and sorrow. "Good. Then you must know what follows. Once this begins, there is no turning back. The Davenports will know. Jedediah will know, and he will strike at us with everything he has left." Clara's pulse quickened, but she did not look away. "Let him." For a long moment, silence reigned again, broken only by the hiss of the ventilation and the hum of machinery. Then Peterson spoke, his voice softer now, as though acknowledging her transformation. "The storm has been gathering for 20 years, Miss Monroe. Tonight, it breaks." Corbin gestured toward the screens. On them sprawled a map of connections, corporations, shell accounts, names linked like a spider's web with Jedediah Davenport at its center. It was vast, intricate, and yet fragile. Corbin's finger traced one thread glowing red. This is the crack in his fortress, a forgotten transfer buried in a Swiss archive. We expose it, and the empire falls. Clara stared at the map, her chest tightening with fear and exhilaration. She had been adrift in questions without answers, a shadow of someone else's decisions. Now she had a purpose, a weapon, and the truth pressing her forward. As the jet crossed the Atlantic, turbulence jolted the cabin. Clara gripped the armrest, but Corbin remained still, as though the shaking outside was nothing compared to the storms inside his mind. He turned to her, finally, his voice low but commanding. "When this is over, no matter the outcome, you will no longer be the same. You will inherit the freedom your mother longed for or the chains she never escaped. Be sure you are ready." Clara met his gaze unflinching. "I was born in chains. It's time I learned how to break them." The words echoed, fierce and unrelenting, filling the cabin with a resolve rivaling the engine's roar. Outside, Lightning tore through the clouds, illuminating their faces for a fleeting second. The weary billionaire, the haunted butler, and the daughter of a vanished mother, united in purpose, bound for a reckoning that would forever change their lives. The rain in London fell in thin, slanted sheets that slicked the cobblestones and turned every light into a blurred reflection. The private jet had landed under the cover of night at a discreet airfield outside the city, and now Clara, Corbin, and Peterson moved through the streets in a black car with tinted windows, heading toward the node that would serve as their point of entry into the Swiss bank's fortress-like servers. Inside the car, the atmosphere was taut, every breath weighed with anticipation. Corbin sat with his hands resting on a leather briefcase that seemed less an accessory and more a weapon. Peterson drove in silence, his eyes flicking to the mirrors with the paranoia of a man who had spent decades expecting an ambush. Clara pressed herself against the window, absorbing the city, her mind torn between awe and dread. "Is it this quiet before something dangerous?" she asked, her voice low. Corbin didn't look at her. The quiet isn't absolute. It's just the moment before the chaos decides to announce itself. Their destination was a nondescript office building nestled in the financial district, blending so seamlessly with its surroundings that it seemed invisible. The asset Corbin had cultivated, a systems architect named Martin Hale, waited inside. A man with thinning hair and eyes sharp from years of staring at code, Hale carried the weariness of disillusionment and the fire of someone who wanted retribution. "You're late," Hale muttered when they entered, his accent clipped, his tone brittle with nerves. "The window will be tight. Security protocols have been upgraded since we last spoke. If there is one mistake, every alarm in Zurich will go off." Corbin handed him the briefcase. Inside was a custom-built portable terminal, layered with scripts Peterson had tested in dry runs. Hale's hands trembled as he lifted it, his voice just above a whisper. "You really mean to burn the whole empire down?" "Not burn," Corbin corrected, his gaze like steel. "Expose. Let it collapse under the weight of its own rot." Clara watched the exchange, her heart hammering. For years her life had been nothing but survival, tips, prescriptions, cheap apartments, the steady erosion of hope. Now she was here, in a hidden office, about to witness a financial strike that could topple one of the most powerful dynasties in the world. She forced herself to breathe, to hold on to the fury that had carried her this far. Hale connected the terminal to the node, and his fingers blurred on the keyboard. The screens lit up with cascading code, encrypted walls peeling away in patterns like falling dominoes. Time seemed to bend. Corbin's voice cut through the hum of machines. "How long?" 60 seconds once the gate opens," Hale answered, sweat forming at his temple. "No more." Peterson stood by the window, the pistol holstered beneath his jacket, pressing against his ribs like an unspoken promise. He scanned the street, his instincts prickling. "They'll come," he muttered. "Maybe not tonight or here, but the Davenports won't let this pass unanswered." Clara stepped closer to the screens, her reflection flickering in the glass. Streams of numbers, names, and transactions cascaded before her. She spotted it, a glowing thread, a transfer marked in red. "This is it," she whispered, "the bribe." Corbin leaned forward. "Pull it." The system roared alive, alarms silent but flashing across encrypted layers. Hale's fingers flew as he extracted the files, compressing decades of corruption into a single digital vein. The countdown appeared in the corner of the screen. 50 seconds, 45, 40. Clara's pulse matched its rhythm, her lungs tight as though the weight of history pressed against her chest. At 30 seconds, the terminal beeped. Hale's face blanched. Someone's trying to close the gate from the inside. They know. Corbin's jaw tightened. "Override it." "I can't," Hale stammered. "Not alone." Clara moved without thinking, sliding beside him, her hands trembling as she followed his directions. Lines of code she barely understood spilled across the screen. Hale guided, she executed, fingers clumsy but determined. The seconds bled away, 25, 20, 15. Then the barrier cracked, a final line dissolving like ice under fire. "We're in," Hale gasped. The files transferred, the terminal pinging completion at the 5-second mark. Hale yanked the cable free, slamming the lid shut. The room fell into breathless silence, broken only by the hammer of Clara's heartbeat. Corbin exhaled slowly, his voice quiet but heavy with triumph. "We have him." Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the windows as if echoing the storm they had just unleashed. Peterson turned from the glass, his face carved with grim certainty. "This is only the beginning. He will know by dawn." Clara clutched the terminal against her chest, its weight immense. Not because of its hardware, but because of the history it carried. Proof of murder, corruption, betrayal. Everything her family had been destroyed by. For the first time, she didn't feel powerless, she felt dangerous. As they left the office and slipped back into the night, Clara glanced at Corbin. He met her gaze with a rare flicker of something almost tender. "You were born for this moment," he said. "Not as a waitress in a corner booth, but as the daughter of those who dared defy an empire." The words struck her like a vow, and as the car melted back into the labyrinth of London's streets, Clara knew the storm was no longer just gathering. It was breaking, and she was at its heart. The jet cut through the night sky like a phantom blade, its engines humming low, steady, purposeful. Clara sat by the window, staring at the infinite blackness beyond, the stars faint and cold, scattered like remnants of promises never kept. London's lights had long disappeared behind them, swallowed by the horizon, and ahead waited Zurich, the heart of the storm they had just set into motion. Peterson moved with the calm precision of a soldier, checking his weapons, testing comms, and running diagnostics on the encrypted channels that would connect them to their allies once the operation escalated. He said little, but his silence was not the silence of indifference. It was the silence of a man who knew the weight of what they carried. Corbin stood near the command console, his posture rigid, his gaze locked on the glowing screens that displayed the data Hale had extracted. The files were there, transfers, signatures, secret accounts, and the damning bribe that had been buried beneath layers of deceit for 30 years. Jedediah Davenport's empire rested on a foundation of rot, and now they held the proof. Yet Clara knew evidence alone was not enough. Power-protected men like Davenport bought silence, bent justice, and reshaped truth. They would need more than evidence. They would need precision, timing, and the kind of audacity that turned whispers into thunder. Her mother's face came to her unbidden, not as the blurred photograph, but as she had described herself in the diary, alive, afraid, fierce in her love. Clara pressed her forehead against the glass, breathing fog into the pane, her voice low. "Hold on, Mama, I'm coming." Corbin's voice pulled her back. He said this is where everything fractures, his eyes never leaving the screens. Once this data is released, the world will know. But the world doesn't always care. What matters is the chaos it creates. Jedediah's empire will falter under the weight of exposure. His allies will scramble. His enemies will circle. That will be our window to move. "And can we reach her in the middle of that storm?" Clara asked. Corbin finally looked at her, his storm-gray eyes burning with the intensity of conviction. No. For 20 years, I've built an empire of my own, not to rival his, but to dismantle his. Every move I've made has been toward this moment. But I can't do what must be done alone. You're not just here because you stumbled onto a photograph. You're here because you're her daughter, and you're stronger than you realize." Clara's throat tightened, but she forced herself to nod. She wasn't the girl who had cleared plates and smiled through exhaustion anymore. She was something else now, a weapon sharpened by grief, tempered by truth. Peterson broke the silence, his gravelly voice carrying a solemn weight. "Our window will be narrow. Jedediah will double his guards when the leak hits, but he will also be distracted. That's when we go in. I'll lead the team. Clara, you'll need to stay with Corbin." "No," Clara said, the word bursting out of her like a spark. "I'm not staying behind while you risk everything." She turned to Corbin, her voice fierce. "If I'm honestly her daughter, then I go." The room went still. Corbin studied her, his jaw tight, his expression torn between command and understanding. Finally, he inclined his head, a subtle but irrevocable concession. "Then you go. But know this, Clara, if you walk into Davenport's lair, there is no turning back." She said, "I turned my back on ignorance when I opened your wallet. I won't turn back again." The engines shifted pitch as the jet descended, Zurich's glow rising in the distance like a constellation of false stars. Clara tightened her grip on the photograph tucked in her pocket, the image of her mother, a talisman against fear. Her father's hidden letters, her mother's diary, the key, the truth, all of it had led here to this point, where past and future collided. Peterson strapped in, murmuring coordinates into his earpiece. Corbin closed the terminal with a decisive click, his eyes on Clara. "Whatever happens from here," he said, "this is no longer my fight, it's ours." The jet touched down, its wheels whispering against the tarmac, and Clara felt the shift deep inside her. She wasn't stepping into someone else's war, she was stepping into her birthright. The daughter of a mechanic who loved without fear, the daughter of a runaway heiress who defied an empire, the daughter of a lioness who had been caged but never broken. Clara straightened her shoulders as the door opened and the cold Zurich air swept inside. The night smelled of rain and revolution. She descended the stairs beside Corbin and Peterson, her pulse steady, her resolve unshakable. This was no longer the story of a waitress finding a photograph. This was the story of a daughter preparing to roar and tear down an empire brick by brick, secret by secret, until the cage that held her mother shattered into dust.